In 1977, a Stanford psychologist actually figured out exactly why startups die.
Yeah, and he definitely didn't study economics or product market fit or venture capital deployment.
Right. Not at all. He studied people who were just entirely paralyzed by an intense, debilitating fear of snakes.
Exactly. And what he uncovered in those clinical trials, it's the exact same psychological glitch that causes a brilliant, wildly ambitious founder to stare at a phone, sweat through their shirt, and just completely freeze instead of making a critical sales call.
It is the absolute definition of a behavioral failure that's basically masquerading as a business failure.
100%. I mean, we spend all this time in the ecosystem doing these very clean clinical autopsies on failed startups.
Oh, yeah, looking at the balance sheet.
Right. We point to the balance sheet, or we say the runway ran out, or, the market shifted.
Yep.
But when you actually look at the raw data of human behavior, the mortality rate of early-stage companies is driven almost entirely by the psychological operating system of the founder.
Welcome to this deep dive. If you are listening to this right now, you are a founder. You are in the arena.
Yeah, and you don't have time for generic pleasantries.
Exactly, and you certainly don't need soft academic fluff. Today's mission is a massive, gritty reality check. We are taking a really dense, landmark academic paper by Albert Bandura.
Right. Self-Efficacy, toward a unifying theory of behavioral change.
That's the one. And we are translating every single piece of its clinical data into an actionable survival guide for the trenches of building a company.
To really grasp the gravity of what Bandura discovered,
Yeah.
I mean, we have to look at the landscape of psychology in the late 1970s.
Set the scene for us.
Well, at that time, the field was heavily influenced by behaviorism, which is the idea that humans are basically just stimulus response machines.
Like Pavlov's dogs, basically.
Right, exactly. The prevailing thought was that if you reward a behavior, you get more of it, and if you punish it, you get less. But Bandura saw a massive gap in that logic.
Because it doesn't always work that way in the real world.
Right. He noticed that in highly stressful, high-stakes environments, people wouldn't even attempt the behavior, regardless of the reward.
And the reward for a founder is massive. I mean, it's a billion-dollar valuation, it's changing the world, it's generational wealth. The stimulus is there.
Oh, it's absolutely there.
But they still don't make the cold call. They still avoid firing that toxic co-founder.
And that avoidance, that is what led Bandura to the foundational concept of this entire deep dive. He identified a critical biological distinction between two cognitive states:
Which are?
outcome expectation and efficacy expectation.
Okay, let's unpack that.
Understanding the friction between these two states is the literal key to unlocking why you, as a founder, might be procrastinating on your absolute most vital tasks.
Let's really pull those apart, because this is where the mirror gets held up to this startup ecosystem. What is the actual difference between those two expectations?
So an outcome expectation is a person's estimate that a given behavior will lead to certain outcomes.
Give me an example from the study.
In the context of Bandura's clinical study with severe snake phobics, outcome expectation was the patient's intellectual understanding that if they wore thick leather gloves and followed the therapist's precise instructions, the snake's fangs literally could not pierce their skin.
They knew the physical reality of the situation.
Exactly. They understood the mechanics of safety.
So for a founder, outcome expectation is basically knowing the mechanical blueprint of the business.
Yes, exactly.
It's that intellectual certainty that, if you build a high-retention software product, customers will renew their subscriptions. It's knowing that if you construct a bulletproof financial model and present a massive total addressable market, investors will be interested.
Right. You understand the physics of the business equation. A leads to B.
But Bandura proved that outcome expectations are functionally useless on their own when a person is under severe stress.
Completely useless. You can have a perfect understanding of the mechanics, but it won't trigger action because outcome expectation is completely divorced from efficacy expectation.
And what exactly is efficacy expectation?
It is the visceral internal conviction that you, personally, despite your flaws and fears, can successfully execute the behavior required to produce those outcomes.
Wait, so it's like knowing the physics of how a parachute works?
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Like you can study terminal velocity, you can look at the tensile strength of the nylon, you can intellectually understand that jumping out of the plane with this equipment will save your life. That's outcome expectation.
Right.
But efficacy expectation is actually having the nerve to stand in the open door of the aircraft with the wind screaming in your ears stairs and physically stepping into the void.
That captures the disconnect perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
The physics of the parachute represent the market dynamics in the product. Pulling the ripcord is the behavioral execution.
And what happens if they don't have that efficacy expectation?
Well, what Bandura's paper highlights with devastating clarity is that individuals can believe a particular course of action will produce certain outcomes. I mean, they have the parachute. But if they entertain serious doubts about whether they can perform the necessary activities, that information does not influence their behavior.
Wow. They just stand in the door of the plane until it runs out of fuel.
Precisely.
This is the founder's trap. I see this constantly.
Oh, all the time.
Founders drastically over-index on outcome expectations because building those expectations feels productive, and honestly, more importantly, it feels safe.
It's a hiding spot.
Right. They spend 6 months locked in their apartment building, perfectly color-coded spreadsheets, obsessing over the theoretical mechanics of their business model. They're engineering the ultimate parachute.
Because spreadsheets don't reject you.
Exactly.
A financial model doesn't look at you and tell you your idea is stupid. By focusing entirely on outcome expectations, founders create a psychological refuge.
They avoid the terrifying reality of their efficacy expectation.
Yeah, their actual biological belief that they can navigate a brutal negotiation or convince a Tier 1 engineer to take a massive pay cut to join their pre-seed startup. Bandura states this explicitly. He says, perceived self-efficacy influences the choice of behavioral settings.
Meaning what?
Meaning we naturally fear and avoid threatening situations we believe exceed our coping skills, no matter how lucrative the potential outcome is.
Man, if you are listening to this right now and you feel that heavy, dragging execution gap, that deep procrastination where you know exactly what you need to do to move the needle today, but you find yourself like reorganizing your Notion workspace instead.
Which we've all done.
Right, but that is not laziness. That is a deficit in efficacy expectation. You have convinced yourself of the outcome, but you have fundamentally failed to convince your nervous system of your own capability.
And Bandura's data goes even further. He notes that efficacy expectations determine not just whether you start a task, but how much effort you will expend and how long you will persist in the face of obstacles.
So it dictates your stamina too.
Exactly. When your efficacy expectation is low, your brain interprets friction as a signal to abort. You cease your coping efforts prematurely.
Oh, I see this so much in outbound sales.
Right. You send 2 cold emails, you get ignored, and immediately pivot your entire go-to-market strategy because you conclude outbound sales doesn't work in this sector.
But the strategy didn't fail. Your internal efficacy crashed at the very first sign of turbulence.
That's exactly it.
So this sets up the most critical question of this deep dive. If efficacy expectation is the true bottleneck for execution, if it is the only thing standing between a founder and their market potential, how do we actually build it?
Because the startup world is full of advice on this.
Yeah, but most of it seems completely detached from actual psychology.
This is where Bandura's work becomes highly disruptive to conventional startup wisdom. He analyzed how human beings actually acquire expectations of personal efficacy, and he categorized the data into 4 principal sources of information.
Okay, let's hear them.
What's really vital to understand is the hierarchy here. These sources are not created equal. Our brains weigh them very differently. The 4 sources are verbal persuasion, emotional arousal, vicarious experience, and performance accomplishments.
I really want to dissect these, starting with verbal persuasion, because this is where the entire fake it till you make it startup culture takes a massive hit.
Oh, a fatal hit.
Verbal persuasion is the pep talk. It's standing in the mirror telling yourself you're a visionary. It's journaling your goals every morning, repeating positive affirmations, or reading self-help books for entrepreneurs.
It's trying to literally talk your brain into being confident.
Right. So what does the data actually say about that?
Bandura's clinical assessment of verbal persuasion is mathematically sobering. He found that efficacy expectations induced solely through suggestion are incredibly weak and transient.
Basically, they vanish.
Right. The neurobiological reality is that your brain is constantly running threat detection algorithms. When you stand in front of a mirror and say, I am a phenomenal public speaker, but your actual experiential data says otherwise, your brain flags the affirmation as a lie.
Because it lacks an authentic experiential base. You are trying to install a software update without the required hardware.
Precisely. People can be led, temporarily, into believing they can code through suggestion. But when they step into a genuinely distressing threat,
Like a critical product launch that starts tanking on day one.
exactly, whatever flimsy mastery expectations were induced by that morning journal entry are instantaneously extinguished by the reality of the disconcerting experience. The cortisol spike of a real-world failure completely overrides the dopamine hit of a pep talk.
The market does not care about your affirmations.
It really doesn't.
When you get punched in the mouth by a well-funded competitor, your journal entry will not keep you in the ring. So the actionable takeaway here for the founder listening is, stop relying on verbal persuasion as your primary armor. It is the weakest form of psychological defense you can possibly build.
Now, the second source, emotional arousal, deals with how we interpret our physical state, which is so nuanced, we really need to dedicate a significant portion of our analysis to it later.
Yeah, we'll circle back to the racing heartbeats and all of that.
But the third source is where founders often inadvertently self-sabotage, and that's vicarious experience.
Okay, meaning modeling. Gaining confidence by watching others perform a threatening activity without adverse consequences.
Right?
And we are completely obsessed with modeling in tech. I mean, we read TechCrunch religiously. We listen to hours of interviews dissecting how billionaires build their empires. We study the marketing campaigns of massive incumbents.
It's the default mode for most founders.
Right, because the assumption is that by absorbing their success, we build our own blueprint for efficacy.
And that assumption is fundamentally flawed, according to the data.
Wait, really? How?
Vicarious experience relies on social comparison. Your brain watches someone else and subconsciously asks, am I like them? Bandura specifically warns against watching what he terms a facile performance by an adept model.
Okay, I have to jump in. I struggle to see how studying success could be damaging. If I want to be great, shouldn't I study the greatest?
It comes down to relatability and perceived expertise. Let's say you are a struggling first-time founder with 3 months of runway left, and you read a profile on a serial entrepreneur who just raised $50 million on a napkin pitch in 48 hours.
Right, which happens all the time in the press.
That is a facile performance, meaning it looks completely effortless by an adept model, meaning they possess special, unreplicable expertise.
So my brain watches that and says, well, of course they succeeded. They have a massive network and a 10-year track record. That has absolutely zero bearing on my ability to raise money.
It's actually worse than zero bearing. It actively diminishes your efficacy. Yeah, observers minimize the value of that information for their own situation. And because the gap between the model's effortless success and the observer's current struggle is so vast, it just reinforces the observer's feeling of incompetence.
That makes total sense. You look at a heavily funded incumbent launching a flawless multi-channel marketing campaign, and your brain just logs that as evidence of your own inadequacy.
Exactly, because you can't replicate their effortless execution.
This flips the script entirely. Who should founders be looking at for vicarious experience if they want to actually wire their brains for resilience?
Bandura found that vicarious efficacy is strictly built by observing a model struggle with determined effort and eventually succeed.
They need to see the struggle.
The brain needs to see the friction. Showing the gains achieved by effortful coping behavior demonstrates to the observer that even the most anxious, under-resourced individual can eventually master a threat through perseverance. You need to see someone like you taking hits, pivoting, stressing over payroll, and still pushing through.
That proves to your amygdala that the environment is survivable.
Precisely.
So stop looking at Elon Musk's timeline. Look at the founder sitting across from you in your co-working space who is grinding out a seed round after 60 brutal rejections. That is the model that will physically alter your efficacy expectation.
Absolutely. But even with the right model, vicarious experience isn't the ultimate tool in Bandura's arsenal.
It's just a warm-up.
It is a distant second to the absolute gold standard of psychological change, which is performance accomplishments, or what Bandura terms inactive mastery.
Inactive mastery.
Yes, this is direct personal experience. Successes raise mastery expectations. Repeated failures lower them. Confidence is not something you can read your way into. Confidence is forged through action, and action alone.
Action is supreme. Let's really ground this in the dirt of a real-world startup scenario.
Let's do it.
Imagine a founder who has spent their entire career in digital spaces, software, coding, theoretical design. Now, they are trying to build offline brand awareness for a highly physical product, let's say a new streetwear apparel brand. They know they need a physical grassroots presence to build cult status.
For a purely digital founder, Stepping onto a literal street to interact with the public is a classic high-threat situation. The potential for immediate visceral rejection is massive.
Exactly. So if we look at the wrong approach, the approach that relies on weak sources of efficacy, they will sit in their apartment reading 5 books on guerrilla marketing.
Which is verbal persuasion.
Right. Then they'll study Nike's multi-million-dollar flawless billboard campaigns.
And that's an adept model doing a facile performance.
Exactly. And when they finally step outside, none of that theoretical armor will hold up against the biological reality of fear.
Because they haven't provided their brain with an authentic experiential base.
The inactive mastery approach is violently different. It requires getting out on the street with 0 theoretical preparation.
Yeah, you just go.
It's printing 50 cheat flyers, standing on a corner in the cold, and physically handing them to people walking by. It's throwing a scrappy pop-up out of the trunk of your car. It's the messy, terrifying reality of looking a potential customer in the eye and watching them sneer at your design.
And here is the counterintuitive brilliance of inactive mastery. If someone sneers at the design and the founder survives that encounter.
Meaning their company doesn't instantly evaporate and they don't physically die.
Right. If they survive, their efficacy actually increases. Bandura notes that occasional failures that are later overcome by determined effort can strengthen self-motivated persistence.
The brain learns that the worst-case scenario rejection is not fatal.
Exactly. It calibrates the threat down.
But this brings us to a massive practical wall. I mean, we are telling founders that the only way to cure their paralysis is to take action. But if they're paralyzed, if their efficacy is essentially at 0, how do they take the first step?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because you can't just yell at a terrified founder to go out there and get rejected. They will just retreat deeper into their spreadsheets. How do we engineer the very first leap without causing them to crash?
To solve this, we have to look really closely at Bandura's actual methodology in the 1977 study. He didn't just take people with severe snake phobias, throw them into a room with a boa constrictor, and tell them to build inactive mastery.
That would just cause immense trauma and reinforce the phobia permanently.
It would flood their system with cortisol and validate every single fear they had. Instead, Bandura engineered a process called participant modeling.
Participant modeling. How did that work?
The clinical environment was rigorously structured so that clients could perform successfully despite their severe incapacities. He didn't ask them to be brave. He made bravery unnecessary by manipulating the environment.
How did that actually play out in the lab? What does manipulating the environment look like for someone who's terrified of a snake?
He introduced what he called response induction aids. These were basically structural safety nets. The protocol started with graduated tasks. First, the patient might just look at a snake safely enclosed in a glass terrarium from across the room.
Okay, low threat.
Very low threat. Once their heart rate stabilized, the terrarium was moved closer. Then they introduced joint performance.
What's that?
The therapist would hold the snake, demonstrating safety, and the patient would just touch the therapist's arm.
Oh, wow. So just physical proximity to the person holding it.
Exactly. Then protective aids were used. The patient would touch the snake, but only while wearing heavy elbow-length leather gloves.
So the threat is systematically neutralized. You are slicing the terrifying milestone into microscopic survivable actions.
Yes.
Let's translate this response induction framework into the startup grind, because this is where founders can actually hack their own psychology. Let's take a B2B SaaS founder who is completely paralyzed by the prospect of cold calling the CEO of a massive national distributor.
A classic scenario.
Right. This one deal could secure their entire Series A. But the founder is staring at the phone, totally frozen by the fear of blowing the pitch.
If we apply participant modeling, the absolute worst advice you can give that founder is just pick up the phone and dial. The cognitive load of that threat is way too high.
So what do we do?
We have to introduce response induction aids and graduated tasks. We break the cold call down until the threat level registers as 0 to the amygdala.
Step 1. Just draft a pitch email. Don't open your email client. Open a blank text document. Don't put an address in the to field. Just type the words of the pitch.
That is the equivalent of looking at the snake in the glass terrarium from across the room.
There is 0 chance of rejection because the send button isn't even on the screen.
Exactly. But the brain successfully executes a behavior related to the threat without triggering the panic response. Inactive mastery has officially begun.
Okay, step 2. Role play the cold call, but only with your co-founder.
This is the joint performance, like the therapist holding the snake.
Right. It creates a safe, controlled container to physically vocalize the words of the pitch.
And notice the progression here. We are moving from cognitive tasks, like writing, to physiological tasks, speaking, slowly increasing the exposure while maintaining the protective aids.
Step 3. The leather gloves. Call a tiny, low-stakes local boutique in a different state. A business whose revenue honestly doesn't matter to your bottom line. Test the pitch on them.
The threat of rejection is real, but the consequence of rejection is totally neutralized.
And this is the science of the micro-win, right?
It is. Bandura's data showed that self-directed mastery, following these assisted structured tasks, leads to generalized expectations of personal efficacy.
So what happens neurobiologically when that founder successfully pitches the local boutique, even if the boutique hangs up on them?
The impact is profound. The founder survives the call. Their brain updates its threat detection operating system. The generalized fear of the phone diminishes. Suddenly, the national distributor doesn't look like a lethal threat, just looks like another phone call.
You are systematically proving to your own nervous system that you will not die.
Exactly.
But I have to push back here, because I know exactly what founders experience in reality. What happens when you structure the micro-task, you make the call to the local boutique, and it is excruciatingly difficult.
Right. It's rarely smooth.
You stumble over your words, your voice shakes, you sweat through your shirt, you feel completely incompetent. A lot of founders do the micro-task, experience that massive internal friction, and their takeaway is, wow, if it took that much out of me just to call a tiny local shop, I must not be cut out to be a CEO. I am a complete fraud.
Yes, that is the trap.
If my body is screaming that I'm in danger, how does that build efficacy?
You've just hit the absolute core of why some founders scale and others collapse. It comes down to a process Bandura calls cognitive appraisal.
Cognitive appraisal.
Yes, an active mastery doesn't happen in a vacuum. The impact of a performance attainment on your self-efficacy depends entirely on how your brain appraises the experience. And Bandura explicitly warns about the high-effort trap.
What's the high-effort trap?
He noted that successes achieved through a high expenditure of effort often connote a lesser ability in the person's mind.
Oh man, this is the imposter syndrome route. We cognitively link massive effort with incompetence.
Exactly. The founder's internal monologue says, if I were a true visionary, if I were the next Steve Jobs, this outbound sales motion would be effortless. Because it is taking every ounce of my willpower just to get through a basic script, I must fundamentally lack the required talent.
They are actively engaged in an active mastery, but they are filtering the data through a cognitive appraisal that completely destroys its psychological value.
That's exactly what's happening.
This requires a radical reframing for every single founder listening. If you are sweating, if you are grinding, if every inch of progress feels like pulling teeth, that friction is not a signal of your incompetence.
It is not.
High effort is not a red flag. High effort is the required biological cost of building something highly defensible.
Think about it. If we zoom out and look at market dynamics, if a task were easy, if it required low effort and zero psychological friction, the incumbent corporations with massive balance sheets and armies of talent would have already executed it.
Your pain is your moat. The only reason there is a gap in the market for your startup to exist is because the problem is so deeply difficult that everyone else avoided it.
Absolutely.
You have to stop looking at your own exhaustion as empirical proof that you don't belong in the arena. Your exhaustion is the proof that you are actually doing the heavy lifting required to displace established players.
And Bandura layers another critical cognitive trap on top of this, which is inaccurate ascription.
Inaccurate ascription. What does he mean by that?
When founders do push through the effort and actually secure a win, they close the seed round, they land the enterprise client, they frequently attribute the success to external factors.
Oh, I hear this all the time.
Right. They say, we just got lucky with the timing, or the investor was just in a really good mood that day.
It's chronic. Right place, right time. They absolutely refuse to take credit for their own survival.
And Bandura warns that attributing your achievements to external fortuitous factors completely short-circuits the development of self-efficacy.
Wow.
If you want to survive the 10-year horizon of building a company, you must cognitively own your wins. Successes only enhance self-efficacy if they are perceived as resulting from your own skill and perseverance rather than from external aids.
When you win, you have to look in the mirror and forcefully ascribe that victory to your own capability. You say, we won that deal because I outworked them. We secured that funding because my grasp of the market was undeniable. Do not give your agency away to the weather or the macroeconomic climate or luck.
Because next quarter, when the macro environment turns against you and your back is against the wall, you cannot rely on luck.
You can only draw down on the internal efficacy you've banked from owning your previous victories. Attribute your success to your grit.
And this cognitive ownership ties perfectly into how founders process the visceral, physical toll of the job. Because cognitive appraisal doesn't just govern how we view effort. It directly dictates how we interpret the physiological feedback our bodies produce when operating at the absolute edge of our abilities.
I really want to paint the picture of this physical feedback because every founder knows this feeling.
Oh, intimately.
You are sitting in the lobby of a venture capital firm. In 10 minutes, you are walking into a make-or-break pitch for your Series A. If you don't secure this term sheet, you are laying off half your engineering team by the end of the month.
High stakes.
Massive stakes. Your heart is hammering against your ribs so hard you can hear it. Your palms are slick with sweat. Your stomach is in absolute knots. Conventional wisdom and, frankly, every instinct in your body screams that you are experiencing fear. And that fear is definitive proof that you are out of your depth.
This is where Bandura's analysis of the fourth source, emotional arousal, provides just an incredible psychological lever. In his clinical framework, physiological arousal is not inherently a negative drive that causes avoidance.
Wait, really?
Its behavioral effect depends entirely on the informative function of the arousal, meaning how it is cognitively appraised by the individual experiencing it.
Break that down for me. The physical sensation of a racing heart isn't the problem, it's just data.
Exactly. The physical feeling is just raw biological data. Bandura points out a fascinating quirk of human biology. The exact same visceral arousal, the spiked heart rate, the rapid breathing, the flooded adrenaline, it occurs in situations of intense fear as it does in situations of intense focus, competitive drive, or even euphoria.
So the biological mechanism firing when I think I am about to get eaten by a bear is the exact same mechanism firing when a professional athlete thinks I'm about to step onto the field and win a championship.
Biologically, yes. It is the sympathetic nervous system mobilizing resources for peak demand. But if you sit in that VC lobby and you perceive your racing heartbeat as stemming from personal inadequacy.
If you slap the label of fear or panic onto that biological data.
Exactly. You will instantly lower your efficacy expectation. Bandura quotes research showing that individuals who appraise their arousal as anxiety become self-preoccupied with their perceived inadequacies. You will walk into that boardroom thinking about your sweaty palms and your shaking voice instead of focusing on the undeniable logic of your pitch deck.
So the tactical move for a founder isn't to try and stop the physical reaction.
No, not at all.
The move is aggressive, deliberate, correct labeling of the biofeedback. When your heart rate spikes before you walk on stage at a conference or before you hit send on a massive product launch, you must intersect that neurological signal. You do not tell yourself you are afraid.
Right. You tell yourself, my body is dumping adrenaline to sharpen my focus.
My system is mobilizing resources. I am not nervous. I am optimized for combat. This is what peak performance feels like.
This directly challenges a lot of modern wellness advice in the startup space.
How so?
Well, Bandura discusses how dual process theories suggest that you have to extinguish the anxiety to change the behavior, meaning you have to find a way to calm down before you can perform adequately. But Bandura's data shows that trying to relax, what he calls symbolic desensitization, is far less effective than actually performing the task while highly aroused.
So locking yourself in the bathroom stall and trying to do box breathing exercises to meditate your racing heart away is actually counterproductive. I know so many founders who do this. They try to forcefully lower their heart rate, fail, and then feel even more panic because they can't calm down.
It is certainly less effective than harnessing that arousal to drive the performance. Bandura notes that behavioral control not only allows one to manage the aversive aspects of an environment, but it also alters how the environment is perceived.
Let that reel for me.
When you choose to execute, despite the physiological arousal, when you deliver the pitch with a pounding heart and a dry mouth and you survive it, you prove to your nervous system that the physical state of arousal is not fatal. You learn to operate within the storm.
You stop fighting your biology and start using it as fuel. It is high-octane fuel that your body is naturally providing to get you through a high-stakes environment. And the beautiful thing about an active mastery is that over time, as you accumulate these survive experiences, that efficacy expectation builds.
Yes. Eventually, the arousal naturally decreases because your brain no longer perceives the VC pitch as a lethal threat. It recategorizes it as a routine procedural task. But in the early days, when everything is a threat, you must reframe the arousal as a biological asset, not a psychological deficit.
We have covered a massive amount of dense psychological terrain today. This is literally the operating system of survival. Let's synthesize this blueprint because efficacy expectations are most severely tested during major transitions. Let's apply this entire 1977 framework to one final, highly realistic scenario.
Let's do it. Consider a brilliant veteran software engineer who is leaving a decade of comfortable, highly paid corporate stability to launch a deep tech, low-carbon materials startup.
They are stepping out of the shadows of the engineering department and into the crosshairs of the CEO role.
Right. And we see this exact profile all the time.
Total domain experts who suddenly have to build the entire company around the tech.
If we look at their expectations, they have a massive outcome expectation. They understand the chemistry and the physics of the low-carbon material. They know that if they can produce it at scale, the heavy industry market is basically mandated by regulations to buy it. The math is undeniable. They're completely secure in the outcome.
But they are completely silently paralyzed by the efficacy expectation of actually being a founder. They've spent 10 years writing code. They've never had to raise pre-seed capital from a skeptical angel investor. They've never had to do enterprise B2B sales. They've never had to look an employee in the eye and fire them. The behaviors required to achieve the outcome are entirely foreign and therefore deeply threatening.
And because their background is engineering, how do they react to a problem they don't understand? They try to study it. They retreat into verbal persuasion and vicarious experience.
Right back to the weak sources.
Exactly. They read endless articles on climate tech funding trends. They consume hours of podcasts dissecting how legendary hardware founders built their supply chains. They try to construct a perfect, flawless mental model of how to be a CEO before taking a single action.
And worse, they are likely looking at adept models doing facile performances, like billionaires who just closed a $200 million climate fund in a week. Watching that doesn't build their efficacy. It just highlights how vast the gap is between the billionaire's capability and their own terrifying reality. They feel smaller with every article they read.
They are trapped in what Bandura calls symbolic experience. They are trying to simulate mastery. But Bandura's ultimate conclusion is that successful performance is replacing symbolically based experiences as the principal vehicle of psychological change.
Right.
You cannot simulate the physiological reality of the arena.
So what's the solution?
The solution for this engineer, and for any founder trapped in this cycle, is radical and immediate.
Stop researching. Stop reading the articles. Stop trying to optimize your mindset in a vacuum. You have enough outcome expectation. You have enough theoretical knowledge to last a lifetime. You are literally suffocating in the theoretical.
The psychological changes required to survive as a founder are induced and altered most readily by the experience of mastery arising from effective performance. They need to engineer a single, immediate micro win to trigger the cycle of an active mastery.
So to you, the founder listening to this right now, whether you are the corporate engineer terrified of the pivot to climate tech, the digital streetwear designer afraid of the physical pop-up, or the sauce founder staring at the phone, dreading the cold call that could save your quarter, get out of your own head today. Your meticulously color-coded spreadsheet is not going to save your company. Your journal entries and morning affirmations will not shield you from the realities of the market.
You must prioritize an active mastery above all else. Use participant modeling to break your most terrifying milestone down into a microscopic, survivable action.
Engineer a single micro win before you go to sleep tonight. Draft the email, even if you don't send it. Write the first terrible line of code. Call the lowest stakes customer on your list and stumble through the pitch. Recognize that your racing heart is not fear, it is focus. Recognize that the massive effort you are expending is not proof of your incompetence, it is the literal construction of your competitive moat. Confidence is not a prerequisite for action. That is the greatest, most paralyzing lie in the startup world. You do not need to feel confident to pull the ripcord. Confidence is the byproduct of surviving the action. Go build your inactive mastery. Because out here in the trenches, it is not the smartest who survive. It is the ones who realize that the parachute only works if you have the nerve to jump.